Good evening. A very warm welcome to the esteemed dignitaries present on the dais today. Honorable External Affairs Minister Dr. S Jaishankar and Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, I take this opportunity to welcome you on behalf of the National Institute of Advanced Studies. I also welcome you on behalf of the International Studies Network Bangalore. This network consists of 7 universities: Pondicherry University, Goa University, Christo Jayanti College, St. Joseph's College, Christ Deemed to be University, Jain University, and the NIAS. The heads of 3 institutions from this network are present here today with us. Once again, I sincerely thank Dr. S. Jaishankar for spending time with us today. The program for today is as follows. I request Director Sir Professor Sailesh Nayak to kindly make a note, followed by which we would have an introduction by Ambassador P.S. Raghavan sir, and followed by the introductions, Honorable Minister will be making an introductory remark, which will be followed by the question-answer session. Today we have with us members and faculty of NIAS, members of the partner institutions, and members from media and diplomatic communities as well. We will be aiming for 3 rounds of question answers. The first one would be by the faculty at NIAS and our partner institutions. The second would be by the scholars, and the third would be by the media and diplomatic communities. If time permits, we may also go for the 4th round. 2 of our scholars, Padma Shri and Ashwin, will be in the aisles today, and if you have a question, you may pass. They will provide you with a chit on which you can write your name and your affiliation. Thank you. I request Professor Nayak to kindly introduce our guests.
Honorable Shri Dr. Jaishankar ji, Ambassador Raghavan ji, the heads of International Network of Bangalore, various colleges, my colleagues at NIAS, the media, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely happy to welcome Dr. Jaishankar ji to NIAS. It's about 5 years back he had come, and most important, he is extremely busy, but still he could find a lot of time for us to interact and understand what NIAS has been doing and its network has been doing. The NIAS, the main idea about NIAS is to address some of the societal issues, not necessarily at national level, but at the global level. And in this, the international studies or international relations play a very critical role. And we, of course, have a very projects which we conduct various research to find out the various issues related to various conflicts, peace research, and many others. The other important aspect is also to build a capacity, and that is why you see the network of the various colleges and universities which we have built in the southern India. And the idea which we have is to emerge as a major center where we can have discussion, debate on various international issues and provide certain interventions to the government. And in this, there are few topics which we have been currently working is on the issues related to energy transition, climate change, air pollution. We work on maritime security as well as the blue economy. We work on the space, especially both from the defense and the civilian needs and international cooperation in this regard. Some of the technologies which we have built right from grassroots to many others, how we can translate into the other areas. And this we would like, some of these topics we would like to be part of the G20 discussion when India is going to chair next year. And this is I think, very appropriate time you have agreed to visit us and provide certain direction in this regard. With this few remarks, I will end there, and I would next like to request Ambassador Raghavan, but before I would like to introduce Ambassador Raghavan. Served as the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board until recently. He engaged on the security and global politics issues with the departments and think tanks in India and outside. From 1979 to 2016, he held diplomatic positions in USSR, UK, Poland, South Africa, Vietnam, and India's ambassador to Czech Republic, Ireland, and Russia. From 2000 to 2004, he was Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's office, dealing with foreign affairs, nuclear energy, space, defense, and national security. As a Secretary in 13 and 14 in Ministry of External Affairs, he was in charge of India's external economic relations and the administration, security, and e-governance departments. He founded and headed the Development Partnership Administration, which coordinates India's economic partnership with developing countries. With this few introduction, may I request Ambassador Raghavan to make your remarks.
Scholars and faculty, not only from NIAS, but also from a number of colleges and universities in Bangalore, and with collaboration from outside Bangalore as well. Puducherry and Goa has been named as well. And I would say that in the last few years, there has been a real upsurge of interest in these subjects among scholars and students, not only in Bangalore, but I think broadly in the South as well. And I think NIAS has done a wonderful job in catalyzing this process including by its initiative of the International Studies Network, which the Director mentioned. I think, Honorable Minister, your interaction will definitely inspire a much broader interest and a more in-depth understanding of how the issues that the scholars and researchers study actually look to the policy maker in the field. And it's the policy maker who sees developments around him and has to fashion responses to further the national interest. And I think this is where the gap shows up between the theory of international relations and the practice of international relations. The Minister today will be speaking on 8 years of national security. Naturally, these are the years of the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Dr. Jaishankar has been intimately involved in this journey, first as Foreign Secretary and then as External Affairs Minister. Also a word about his subject today, national security. I think it draws attention to something that is not often realized in day-to-day life, how much the external environment and external developments impact on our national security, and how much of our foreign policy is actually devoted to the defense and furtherance of our national security. So with these few words, I would like to invite the Minister to make his remarks. He has indicated that he will start with some remarks on the subject that we talked about, and then he will kindly take questions from the floor. So, Honorable Minister, most welcome.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raghavan, for your. Now I have a very pleasant duty to introduce today's our chief guest, Dr. Jaishankar. As you know, he is India's External Affairs Minister since 2019. He is a member of the Upper House, Rajya Sabha of the India's Parliament from Gujarat. He was a Foreign Secretary from 15 to 18, an Ambassador to United States 2013 to 15, China 2009 to 13, and Czech Republic 2009 to 2014. He was the High Commissioner to Singapore 2007 to 2009. He has also served in other diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well as in the Ministry of External Affairs and President's Secretary. He was also President, Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited. Dr. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen College in University of Delhi. He has a Master's in Political Science and MPhil and PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written widely acclaimed best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. With this few remarks, I would now request Dr. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, to make his remarks.
Director, Professor Sailesh Nayak, Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, dear friends. First of all, let me say what a really great pleasure it is to be back at NIAS. Before I entered the room, I went and saw the plant that I planted 5 years ago. I didn't realize it had been so long. The plant has grown. I'm not sure I have, I really look forward very much to today's interaction, and particularly because it's not only the NIAS faculties to researchers, students that I'm meeting, but also because by now you have evolved a larger international studies network, and I really compliment you for that. So let me get down straight away to business. And start with the topic, 8 years of national security. So I'd like to explain to you why did I pick that topic, 8 years of national security. Because these 8 years actually, you could argue there have been a number of achievements by the government under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. Many of those achievements are achievements you see every day. You saw it in a way, in the manner in which we met the COVID challenge. You can see it in terms of today how much more and differently development has unfolded. It could be in terms of infrastructure, in terms of electricity connection, water connection, housing programs the government does, the cooking gas programs, the skill initiative that they have, the girls' education initiative that they have. So there are, when you actually look at these 8 years, I could have actually pretty much picked one of about 100 subjects and said, okay, I'd like to talk to you about that today. But I chose national security, and I was very conscious of it. I didn't choose foreign policy, okay? I chose national security. And I chose national security because I feel that very often as a country, as a society, we take it for granted. And we take it for granted if you actually think what national security means. I look at it in terms of the well-being of the country and the society, in terms of protecting against the vulnerabilities that we may face, and in a sense, on a positive way, to enhance our competitiveness. So if those are really the goals of our national security, and I again underline the point that I believe that national security is the foundation really for any development and progress of a society. I want you to think for a moment at 4 challenges that we have all been through in the last few years. The challenge of COVID, and they all happen, by the way, at the same proximate timeline. The challenge of COVID, the challenge of what is happening in our northern borders vis-a-vis China, the challenge of what happened in Afghanistan, the outcome and what implications it has, and now the challenges of the Ukraine conflict and its global repercussions and how that is impacting our lives. And I want you to think that the decisions we made, the courses of action that we chose, the outcomes that resulted, how much different your lives would have been and my life would have been had we done something else. So when I make this point that national security is something which we take as other people do it, it is done somewhere, the point I wish to drive home is it's real, it impacts you, as Ambassador Raghavan said, every day in a more globalized world, the external world impacts us more and more, and I want you to be very conscious of it. And where I am concerned as the External Affairs Minister, obviously the point which I will be making to you is how much diplomacy directly contributes to national security. Now the next question which I asked myself and which I know would be of interest to you is, you will ask me, why Bangalore? Why have you come with this thought to Bangalore? And my most honest answer to you is, one great virtue of Bangalore is it is out of Delhi. So that itself is a reason to come out. But that's not the only virtue. So I also, we want to, from on part of the government, to send out the message that all of you are stakeholders in national security and everything associated with it. So it should not, national security should not be a debate in Delhi, for Delhi, by Delhi. In the Ministry of External Affairs some years ago, we set up something called the States Division. Typically in bureaucracy, what happens, people say, okay, States Division means you must be dealing with correspondence involving, state governments. Yes, we do. But we wanted to send home the message that we actually want to democratize foreign policy, because when you actually are in different parts of India, and that is something, when I go out to different corners of India, I feel that how you perceive the world also depends on which part of India you are in. Your priorities adjust to that accordingly. But the third reason why I wanted to come and speak in Bangalore and in NIAS specifically was, I do think that Bangalore, specifically Bengaluru and Karnataka, it is today, no disrespect intended to anybody else, and I'm neither representing the state nor am I my origins lie in it. So it's a very objective statement. I think this is really one of the most progressive states in India, and certainly Bangalore is one of the most, not only one of the most progressive cities, it actually to the rest of the world is like a poster child of Indian modernity. And I felt in such an arena, it is very important to understand what national security is about. And of course, you are all super connected, so, therefore you should really know what the external world means. So the second message I have to you is, when you think, first of all, don't make assumptions, be aware of national security. Number two, think of national security as a whole of a society, whole of a nation enterprise, because I think a lot of, our history and our future will depend really on how strong that whole of the nation feeling is. There's always a debate on this unity, diversity, balance. My sense of history is that where our sense of unity has been very strong, India has always done well, and certainly that is the direction this government would like to go. Now, I have also a particular word for students of international relations. Ambassador Raghavan and I discussed it briefly a little while ago. I studied international relations too. And one of the challenges when you look at actual situations is, you try to force fit what you study onto real life. That you look at real life situations and you say, yes, but this doesn't match what I was taught or what I was learned. So one advice as a practitioner of international studies, having studied it, is it's important for concepts really to grow with life, to learn from life, to learn from practice. And I'm sure your analysis of international relations would be more accurate, much richer, more nuanced if you actually took the complexities of life into your calculations. So let me come to this point. Why did I choose the word national security, the term national security, rather than foreign policy or diplomacy? Because my sense is, even today, many of us, when we think of national security, we have an imagery of, a soldier guarding our borders, or maybe a policeman, a black cat kind of policeman, or special forces dealing with the terrorists. So we associate it with a very old-fashioned, limited, hard security kind of thinking. Maybe, as you grow, as you kind of think bigger, people sometimes look at nuclear issues and say, okay, that is national security. But again, I want you to reflect on national security through the lens of those 4 challenges, the challenges which have happened in the last 2 years, in the time since I was last in NIAS. And think of what the national security implications of those are. Let's take COVID, okay? We were able to produce made in India vaccines in a large way. We were even able to produce an invented in India vaccine, which, by the way, I had in my arm, as did the Prime Minister. We were able to produce, we were not just able to make it in India and invent it in India, we were also able to inject it in India, because let me tell you, a lot of countries struggled actually with the process of vaccinating the people. So we were able to get a kind of vaccination drive done in a very, very successful way. So I just think for a moment, what would have happened if this was not the case? Had our ability to produce vaccines not been as good as it was, if our turn in the queue, so to speak, came later, which by the way has happened to many countries, what would have been the consequences for our societal fabric and therefore for our national security? Had we not been able to produce the outcomes that we did during the time of COVID? I want you to reflect on it. But before we even got to vaccination, we saw another aspect of national security. In a way, for 2020 and 2021, I can say, yes, I was the Minister of External Affairs, but I was also, like some of my other colleagues who were in a COVID group, we were all also ministers of COVID affairs, that a lot of our time went in contributing to a larger national purpose under the Prime Minister's leadership on how do we respond to the COVID. And we scrambled in 2020. We were looking for masks, we were looking for PPEs, we were looking for ventilators, we were looking for medicines, we were looking for APIs to make the medicines. And you asked yourself, is it not dangerous for our national security that we are so dependent on external sources, and that this belief that there is a just-in-time economy which will deliver smoothly every day, 24/7, 365 days a year, the COVID told us that was not the case. So when we think national security, certainly from the COVID, no question, we now think health security. But I now ask you, should we not be thinking manufacturing security? And in a sense connected with it, employment security. And have we not slid into a kind of a comfort level where we feel we will get things from the world, we will fit it in our top lines, we will post our 8% growth, companies will do well, but actually we are not developing the deep strengths, we are not developing the supply chains within the country, so that in a moment of crisis, we were not left as vulnerable as we were in those years. Let me move to another issue which also happened at this time, which was the Chinese massing forces and unilaterally trying to change the status quo on the line of actual control in the Ladakh sector. Now, here again, when we look back over these last 2 years, we've actually had Indian forces deployed there under very, very, probably the toughest conditions that you can find anywhere on this planet, in very large numbers, who are standing their ground, and in that sense, ensuring that national security is achieved. Now, what is the enabler to do that? The enabler to do that today, if they were able to do it today, and you have to understand the scale of really what has happened in the last 2 years. I mean, if you look at the deployment of forces in that sector, it is actually the biggest deployment probably we have done since the 1962 war. So the idea that so many troops could go there and be maintained there logistically over 2 winters now has been because of the infrastructure progress that we have made. In fact, it is the fact that in the border areas, the speed of our infrastructure development has been 2 to 3 times of what it used to be before in the last 8 years. That is really what has enabled our troops to be deployed out there. So again, when you think national security, a road that we build, our ability to make tunnels, to build bridges, these are also very much a part of our national security. I mean, without the appropriate infrastructure, and if there are actually efforts at delaying or derailing the building of infrastructure, especially in border areas, you should ask yourself, is that not a weakening of your national security? So, and it isn't, I'm citing to you infrastructure, but it's also a case where actually diplomacy was very much in evidence, that our ability to access the right kind of equipment for troops to stay there in the winter was also a contribution to national security. So let me move to the third issue, which was Afghanistan. Now, we saw what happened on August 15th last year, and the impact it had on radicalization across a much larger area. Now, I'm not specifically saying something necessarily out of Afghanistan is going to in some way negatively impact us. It could, it need not also. But it tells you the power of ideas. It tells you today how ideas in a connected world, in a much more literally networked world, have actually, there were times when people you'd say somebody has to go somewhere to get radicalized. Today you hear this word self-radicalized people, and some of what happened in Sri Lanka, for example, some very violent actions were done by self-radicalized people. So the power today of ideas, of radical ideas, often violent ideas, traveling without physical travel, actually changes your entire concept of national security. So physical barriers and controls are no longer a sufficient defense. They still have their place, but they are no longer sufficient. And finally, let me draw your attention to the implications of the situation in Ukraine, the conflict there. For a large part of the world, including us, today it shows up in what we call a 3F crisis: fuel, food, and fertilizers. That these three, prices of these three have gone up. They have a very significant inflationary impact. In the case of food, they will actually lead to hunger situations. In the case of fertilizer, it will create a cascading problem down the road. So the next harvest in many countries are going to be endangered. So it tells you again how something far away has actually a direct implication on our well-being. In some cases, how it increases our vulnerability. And as I said, it could even actually impact our competitiveness. So I want you to really imagine national security as something not country, borders, and beyond the borders. This is the entire world actually which can today come to your home in different ways. It can come as a virus, it can come as a cost of petrol, it can come as a shortage of food, it can be a problem with fertilizers, it can come as a radical idea in your neighborhood, or it is something which could come because in your country, the system was not geared to give the right responses when it was being threatened from outside. So what is the answer? The answer, obviously, since it is so comprehensive, is the concept of comprehensive national power. Many of you know it, understand it. And I want you to appreciate that in these 8 years of the Modi government, what we have tried to do is actually to build India comprehensively. I can, when I told you at the start that there were many things I could talk about, girls' education, skills India, digital India, Swachh Bharat, each one of them is a dot. I want you to connect these dots. If you connect these dots, you will realize that there is actually a holistic vision, integrated vision of what our comprehensive national power should be. And that comprehensive national power, first of all, is dependent on improving the quality of human resources. It's a very people-centric approach. And in a way, in international relations parlance, I can say, if we are successful in implementing our sustainable development goals by the end of this decade, I can tell you we will revolutionize India. That you will see immediately, already we have seen, even in these 8 years, we have seen a big change in the gender ratio in India. It's a very remarkable change. There are other societies which have really struggled to change the direction in which that gender ratio has been moving. And the fact that we've actually been able to make that much progress is not a small achievement. But there are other areas. I mean, if you today look, for us today, it could be nutrition, it could be education, it could be health access, it could be school admission, school retention, skills, employability, innovation. As you go up the ladder, every bit matters. So when you hear of programs which are done by the government, if you look at the scale of these programs, many of these programs are actually bigger than populations of entire continents, leave alone countries. So it's when I say of the things we take for granted, I think you all also must appreciate in the last 8 years, things, really transformational things have been happening around you. And if you connect up the dots of this, you will understand the scale of that transformation. So where does diplomacy fit in all of this? Diplomacy, first of all, for any system or any society, creates awareness. Tells you, okay, these are the dangers in the world, these are the opportunities in the world. When you start to employ it, idea is obviously you leverage it, you try and get things from the world, technology, capital, best practices, collaborations. It helps to build relationships because often, like we do as human beings, when you get into trouble or when you want things, those with whom you have better relations are more responsive than others. It's a very essential part of communication because we are actually dealing with a cross-cultural world where what I say is not necessarily what you may hear or understand. At the same time, it also, in a way, messages intent, it messages capabilities. It has a deterring effect because where there are challenges, diplomacy sometimes can very clearly radiate the message saying, don't do it. And that's, as you can understand, a message which is often sent by us to our Western neighbor. Or sometimes diplomacy can be a preventive. It can head off problems. Or when problems happen, it can even be a solution finder. So when you think in orthodox terms of, national security and a soldier, I put it to you, the diplomacy in a way stands before the soldier, but it also stands behind the soldier. So it tries to head off situations where a soldier will be needed, but if a soldier is needed, it is also fully supportive of the soldier and make sure that the soldier is successful in the execution of what he is being given to do. So what has been the last 8-year record? And I'll just very quickly sum it up because I want to keep more time for the Q&As. I think if you look at the more obvious issues, It's a record which has been very firm. It's been a very steady record. When it comes to a perennial challenge, which is Pakistan and their sponsorship of cross-border terrorism, I think you've seen a degree of clarity that, we will not be brought to the table by the pressure of cross-border terrorism. And when that has crossed limits, I think you've also seen responses, as in the case of Uri and Balakot. Where China is concerned, as I said, we are again very clear that we will not allow the line of actual control to be changed unilaterally and in violation of understandings that we have. And therefore, we will stand our ground very strongly. We will, while standing our ground, also engage the Chinese so that where the deployments are particularly dangerous, we at least find a way of de-frictionalizing that in a way. One very, I would say, important achievement of these 8 years was actually the land boundary agreement with Bangladesh. It's had an enormous impact on the India-Bangladesh relationship. It has really opened up huge possibilities for Bangladesh, for all our northeastern states. So our ability today to move goods, have people travel, to supply electricity, power, energy, all that has really, and it's shown up in trade figures. But it is also, what it has done is it's created a much more peaceful Northeast. Elements who previously thought they could get shelter there obviously don't anymore. Similarly, where Myanmar is concerned, again, we've had a foreign policy that has engaged the regime and made it very difficult for Indian insurgent groups to operate there. On a different front, the oceanic front, there's actually been, again, a sea change, if you'll pardon the pun, in thinking. You can see today from the days when we sort of were very hands-off even with very immediate neighbors like Sri Lanka. Today you can see how much more integrated our view is of what we call a Sagar policy. With the big powers, I think we have been quite successful in engaging all of them and ensuring that our national interest is best served. It can be done in new forms of engagement, like you can see unfolding in the case of the Quad. In fact, now not one, but we have a emerging grouping of four countries on the West as well. But also in situations like Ukraine, where we have been very clear-eyed about what the issues are and what our interests are, and how do we strike a proper balance between that. We've also developed a sense of an extended neighborhood, which is the Southeast Asia, that was already developing from the 1990s, but we have taken it further, but now much more towards the Gulf and towards Central Asia. In a sense, you could say this was our neighborhood of pre-partition India, of you can say civilizational India. So I think today that is very much underway. In an area which should be of particular interest to NIAS, if you look at the technology world, again, there's much more activity. You actually have a government which certainly looks at space-based challenges and cyber challenges much more seriously and much more effectively. And at the same time, we have joined regimes like MTCR and Vasanar and Australia Group. And there is a sense today that technology should be very much at the heart of our engagement with the world. We've also tried to influence the big global debates, both through negotiations and through initiatives like the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And as a society, we have actually tried now, and I would say with some degree of success here, I would say the right word would be perhaps to enhance the India branding. That on the world stage, the idea of a civilizational state with an old culture and heritage, which has a lot to contribute, And this can happen, in terms of International Day of Yoga, or traditional medicine, Ayurveda, or it can happen even in debates on democracy. So that sense that there is a almost, I would say, a kind of eternal India out there which today has great value for the world. And in my view, there is also an X factor, which is that if, as someone who really goes to a lot of international events and spends time with leaderships of other countries, very honestly, I would say to you, in these 8 years, our stock has grown up, and among the reasons for that is all you have to do is to look at a television screen and see what the Prime Minister is doing. So the point I would conclude with is that the next time you think about international relations, think about politics, analyze, diligence, understanding, all of that is important. But also give weight to a vision, the ability to deliver on it, and to have a decisive leadership which makes all of that possible. Because I believe that in the last 8 years, all of us, you, me, our dear ones, our near ones, are far more secure and safe. And I certainly am confident that that will be the direction in which the government will continue to go. So thank you once again for your attention, and I'll be very happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir. That was a great start to the session. We can now move to the question-answer round. I request Ambassador Raghavan, sir, to kindly moderate the session. Our team is here to help you with the...
Coverage of national security well beyond the conventional understanding of the term, say, bringing it as an all-of-nation enterprise, as something that all of us need to focus on in our various day-to-day pursuits and endeavors as well. The focus on growth and development, particularly social and economic development, as an essential building block of national security. And of course, all of this leading towards a comprehensive national strength, comprehensive national power, as you mentioned, as the fundamental basis on which our national security is. I don't want to further summarize what you said, Minister. There are a number of questions from the floor that people are waiting to ask. So let me move straight on to this. I have a list here of people who have requested to ask questions. I think the first is the faculty from NIAS and from partner institutions. If I think it's all right by you, we take a couple of questions, sure. 2 or 3 questions together, and then maybe you can respond to that. The first is from Dr. N. Manoharan, Director of the Center of East Asia Studies of Christ University.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful exposition, especially the challenges that you outlined. I'm just wondering, in addressing these national security challenges, what could be the role of higher education institutions, either that be universities, colleges, or think tanks? And is there any plan or strategy that the government has in enhancing this particular capacity of these higher education institutions in addressing these national security challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next, which is Dr. Somaya of St. Joseph's College.
Honorable Minister, I congratulate you for your illuminating lecture. You are really enlightened. I have a very basic question. So as a teacher in the classroom, on behalf of all my students, I am asking this question. So India today is a very influential country, no doubt about it. And they have a very influential Prime Minister. He has visited the United States of America, if I am not wrong, for 7 times. And widely respected all over the world. In such a background, what are the reasons, which are blocking us from getting the permanent membership of the Security Council? Thank you.
The third question comes from Dr. Priyanka Mathur Department of Political Science of the Jain University.
Good evening, sir. Very warm welcome from all of us at Jain Deemed to be University to you. A double-barreled question here first. Given the background of what you just said, wonderful 8 years. So would you say that our place now in a multipolar world has arrived? We are there. And secondly, therefore, looking at what's happening on our east, the rise of the military in Myanmar, and then the Taliban in Afghanistan, would you agree with me if I say that the burden now of upholding democracy, rights, gender equality, secularism, all of that falls even more on India's head in South Asia? Thank you.
We've got actually 3 in this round, if you like, which is one round of...
Sure. Let's...
So we're doing it like a quiz, I think,
Yes.
with 3 rounds of...
No.
We'll go on to the next question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Which is from NIAS itself, from Dr. Rudrodip Majumdar.
Very warm greetings, sir. It is an honor to be able to meet you in person. I work in energy and environment program here. You talked about the resilience building. So one of the biggest aspirations of India currently is a green energy aspiration. And for these critical energy materials, like the battery materials and the magnet materials, we have to secure the raw material inputs for them. And peripherally, we get to hear from the news items that this are getting discussed in the Quad meetings. So I just wanted to know from you if the technology transfer and the raw material availability issues are being discussed at a higher level, or smoothing of the transfer also is being considered. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. The last one in this round, Dr. Prakash Paneerselvam.
Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure meeting you. So, like the idea of like what you have talked about, the plan, the challenges is very interesting. But the maritime is one of the important component, which I think should be more emphasis, because like the maritime connectivity, which is being discussed a lot in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with ASEAN countries and other trade related interest. But what kind of effort has been taken so far in terms of establishing our relationship with further with other East Asian countries in terms of maritime connectivity, and the kind of challenges we face in this region, and how we are planning to address those issues, as we recently signed a kind of part of Quad initiative. So how do you think it will pan out in the future, kind of challenges we face in maritime connectivity? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let me start with the first question, really, from the perspective of a higher education university. I think my answer would please you, but it's not an easy answer to deliver on. Look, as our foreign policy becomes bigger and more complex and has to process much more from a more complicated world, all things do not need to be done in the government. Okay. If you look at big countries, if you look at the US, you look at Russia, China, I would say my experience is even in Japan, to some degree in Europe. A lot of foreign policy making uses educational institutions, because there's a lot in the open source. You know. So they do have the ability and the space to contribute, in my view. I would also be candid with you. My sense, again, I say this as a person who studied international relations in university 40 years plus ago. We haven't grown international relations in the way in which, I mean, if I were to give you a foreign relationship, foreign policy graph and say, give me a IR growth graph, there is a big gap there. So, as a foreign minister, it certainly is something which interests me. How do we proliferate and strengthen IR departments across universities? That's the bit which will please you. The bit which you still have to hold your breath is it's actually a conversation I'm still having with the education minister. So, you know, finally, like most things in life, it comes down to resources. But resources is only one part of it. Somewhere there needs to be a vision and a will, as you heard me say in other areas, to actually make that happen. So I hope in the coming years, if this thought is able to translate itself into some kind of policy, you would take me a little more seriously than you would do today. The second issue, the UNSC. Look, honestly, I am sure that today an overwhelming part of the world wants us in the Security Council. And this is not me feeling good about myself. We have elections, okay? I mean, every month we have election for something or the other. If you look at India's record of winning elections, it's a very consistent record, okay? We may lose an odd one here and there, but we win, and we win quite handsomely. And the reason is, a lot of countries feel when India stands for something that, an Indian voice, we've been through 3 or 4 very stressful months in the UN environment because of the Ukraine conflict. But even if I say so myself, I think there is a general sense, okay, the Indians are responsible, Indians are sober, they use, they're very measured in taking positions, they try to find solutions, they try to bridge divides. So my sense is there is huge sentiment out there in our favor. Our problem is that, as you sometimes have in a public bus, the guy sitting on the seat won't vacate it, okay? So they don't want, there are countries who actually have been there since 1945. Now, you can argue today they are not reflective of the global reality. But let's expand it. You don't have to replace somebody. So actually you're not asking somebody to get up from the seat. You're just saying put another bench out there. And it is actually I think in a sense the reservations today of the entrenched players, who then find partners outside, because you can always find somebody who has a vested interest in this not happening. But I hope, we will, something you have, perseverance is a very important part of this journey. The related question, therefore, have we arrived at multipolar? I think we are arriving at it. It's present continuous. I don't think there's a definitive point. Certainly, if you look at India's economic weight today, we are a $3 trillion economy. If you look in the kind of global rankings by different yardsticks, yes, we are up. But remember, we're still $2,000 per capita society. Okay, our growth is still ahead of us. We have kind of now reached a certain stage. And again, a lot of what I was telling you, what the government is doing, is there is like an immediate problem, but we are also doing a long-term vision. We are preparing, one of the things the Prime Minister keeps telling us, this is 75 years of independence. So it's Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. But he said the Amrit Kal, the 25 years is ahead of you. So keep thinking, what are you going to be doing for the next 25 years? Where do you want to see the country 25 years from now? And I think a lot of our multipolarity journey, which will be reflective of that I think is still ahead of us. But it will only happen if we constantly expand our space. That as you go up, you can't go up with narrow shoulders. You have to sort of broaden that space. There will be counter pressures. The journey upwards is never an easy journey. It's not only gravity which pulls you down. There are a lot of other forces also which pull you down. So I think you have to, in a sense, both find a way of rising and find a way of growing your space. And in our own neighborhood, look, it's not just now, but definitely our neighborhood looks at us much more now. You can see today the very severe crisis Sri Lanka is going through. And we saw it during COVID as well, that a large part of our neighborhood basically said, look, we'll get some trickle from the rest of the world, but, we're really looking to you. In a way, our own policy, our policy of neighborhood first is really to do that interconnectivity with the neighborhood so that we get economy of scale. That it could be power, because it's possible that power in eastern India is more easily consumable in Bangladesh rather than having to be wheeled into Karnataka. So I think if we are able to build regionalism, a sense of scale. Now, your query was, what about these issues like gender or democracy? We have always, look at our history. We have always stood up for what is right. Now, again, foreign policy is not a debating platform. I can't stand up and say, I believe in this and I will mechanically apply it. I have many other irons in the fire as well. So I have to weigh, okay, if I have a government, what is the, what are my security interests, what are my economic interests, what are my, even with civil society, what are my short-term interests, what are my long-term interests. So you strike a balance. And those who advocate strong ideological positions always look at the record and see how much they practice it themselves. It's a great learning when you actually subject the advocates to some degree of scrutiny. On the green energy issue, yes, actually critical materials, strategic and critical materials has been discussed in the Quad. It is an area where we have a common interest. It is also an area where actually there will be much more global debates, because again, the Ukraine conflict could well trigger a very radical shift in global energy thinking. So many things which people would say, yes, it's coming, give it a few years. People are accelerating plans. My sense is in all of this, in a very immediate sense, yes, there is a great demand for fossil fuel. Many of the ideological objections, other than climate change objections, have been overcome in the short term. But my sense is in the medium term, people will see that today fossil fuel can create vulnerabilities of a kind. But of course, so will renewables if you do not diversify your sourcing. So it's not like that's an easy answer. That also will have its own challenges. And finally, the maritime issue, the convergence among Quad countries is sharpest on the maritime side. And it's a very natural domain because they're all seafaring powers. And if you look just at this recent Tokyo meeting, there were two very interesting initiatives in the making. One is a green shipping initiative, which is really create green shipping corridors in the Indo-Pacific. The other, of course, is a maritime domain awareness initiative, which is not a Quad initiative, it's a larger Indo-Pacific initiative. But it is definitely an area because when you look at the vulnerabilities in the global commons, which have opened up today because no one country has the ability or the willingness to police it, I think the maritime domain is one which is very vulnerable, and it's in common interest to do something about it.
Thank you. We're really running out of time, so I would like to request in the next round for people to keep their questions as short as possible. We have 10 in the next round, so we'll make it 5 and 5 if you like.
Sure.
And the sixth one, we will take the question from the online
Yeah,
Goa University.
Sure.
University. Which,
okay.
So you want to start with Goa University? Go ahead.
The first question is from Professor Raju from Pondicherry University.
Oh, you got Pondicherry also.
Yes.
Okay.
He says India has reiterated the centrality of the Act East policy in the Indo-Pacific and advocates a free, open, prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Can India influence on ASEAN's policy towards China? And secondly, can Quad guarantee security to India against China in any anticipated border conflict? The second question is from Professor Rahul from Goa University. He says one has seen a perceptible difference in the internal security scenario in the recent years on ground, particularly when it comes to the civilian population. Is there a fundamental way in which the governance of our security architecture, such as the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and National Security Council, has changed and interacted more with each other during these last 8 years?
So we now go on to the research scholars from various institutions. We start with Harini Madhusudan, PhD scholar from NIAS.
Thank you so much, sir. My question is related to India's space program. And I'm working on outer space, so I was just reading about how there's an increasing role that is played by the private industries. And we know there are a lot of Indian startups that are being nurtured by India and also that are giving out a lot of services. So when and how will we see the role of these private industries in ISRO's activities or India's space activities? Secondly, the role that India could play in, say, taking decisions or making a call for reviving the Outer Space Treaty or in the global level, because we are a space power ourselves and there's so much we could do if we initiate conversations. So where and how can we generate this conversation? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Akriti Sharma, PhD scholar from NIAS.
Thank you, sir, for your lecture. My question is regarding climate change as a security threat to not just India but the whole world. So my question to you is, how can India play a significant climate action leader in South Asia, as we know the region is going to face major climate risks? Thank you.
Thank you. Apurva Sudhakar, also from NIAS, Research Associate.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. My question is regarding India-Africa relations. When we look at the external interest in Africa, we see that there are a lot of investments, particularly from China and Russia in Africa. My question is, what is India's strategy to counter or cooperate with different countries in Africa so that we can protect our own interest? Thank you.
Thank you. We now have a PhD scholar from Syria who is studying in Jain University, James Tamush.
Yes, warm greetings to all of you. Undoubtedly, India is a comfort zone for the international students, especially those who are from the war-torn regions like Syria. On what grounds may the citizenship be granted to scholars studying in India from these parts of the world? Thank you so much.
Thank you. A research scholar from Christu Jayanti College, Emmanuel Selvarayan.
Honorable Minister, you really inspire us, me and my fellow young scholars, to aspire for IR. So my question is that, my question comes from the statement you made at the EuropeSec conference, that is, Europe is too, the world is too Europe-centric. Yes, sir. So do you think India has the leverage to shift the world from Eurocentric system to an Asian-centric system? Thank you.
Go through the rest as well? Or
No, I'll stop here. Okay. Look, first question, the one which came remotely, on free and open India, Indo-Pacific and Quad guaranteeing Indian security. Look, I think that's not an accurate understanding of the purposes of Quad or the activities of Quad. Quad is actually 4 countries who found that they had enough common interest and enough common beliefs and values and, in that sense, comfort to do things together. So it was not, one country taking over the underwriting another country. I mean, that was never the intent. I think that's a very fundamental misreading of what the Quad is about. So do look at Quad as a sort of contemporary mechanism, which is a post-treaty, because if you see the 1950s, 60s, 70s, a lot of things in international relations were anchored on treaties and agreements. So this is a sort of a post-treaty world, much looser, much more flexible, which is looking at a set of agreed issues in an agreed domain. So it is largely centered around the Indo-Pacific, and it has a set of agreed issues. So I don't think we should, ascribe to it something which was never even, envisaged. On the internal security issue, yes, I mean, there's a topic, it's a completely different topic, it's a world of its own, and I really think somewhere NIAS should also maybe hear somebody authoritative on that subject, which is how much internal security has improved in the last 8 years. It is not something often written about, and a large part of it is due to better coordination. And in fact, you know, as someone who's been in government for now close to 5 decades, it is actually today the sense of coordination within the government is very, very strong. So better results come out not because you have necessarily a more capability, it is because actually the silos are less of a silo. On the space issue, yes, it's been a very strong view of the government that we should now allow private sector players to enter the space domain, that we believe that the space domain will benefit, we believe the country would benefit, that there's a lot of innovation out there, more resources can come out there. And in a very similar way, you would also all have noted a new drone policy, that here too we are encouraging, you know, this idea of a startup, innovation, you know, tinkering labs. We want to change the culture of the coming generation about what they can do, what they can contribute, what they can create, and certainly space is one such area. On the Outer Space Treaty, that's a subject of continuing conversations, it is not new. On the issue of climate as a security threat, yes, I think we can already see whether, you know, up in the mountains or you can see a really regularly unseasonal happenings where climate is concerned. And there are two parts to it, you know. One part of it is what is climate action, which is what are we doing about it. And you can see at Glasgow, we have been quite ambitious. We have made some fairly bold commitments, but they are bold commitments which have been made after a lot of deliberation, and we are very confident we'll be able to deliver on those. But it's not enough, because we cohabit a planet, for us to do it alone. And here we therefore are also making a push for climate justice, which is countries which do not have the resources need to get those resources, and frankly the developed world has continuously shortchanged the developing when it comes to keeping their commitments in meeting climate change. And therefore we are today very forceful advocates for more resources, so that it's, you know, it's not just about we want more resources. That sounds very selfish. I think the world wants more resources, and I think India is prepared to advocate that cause for the rest of the world, and I do believe we have that credibility today to do that. On India, Africa, and in a sense the previous observation relates a lot to Africa. You know, my top of the head recollection, my figures could be a little bit off, is today India is, I think, the 4th largest investor in Africa. Our investments are somewhere in that $70 to $80 billion range. But if you look at the Africa policy in the last 8 years, there's been a massive ramp up. In 2017, Prime Minister Modi decided that he would open 18 new embassies, Indian embassies. All 18 were in Africa. We have today projects, development projects. Out of 54 countries, my recollection is we have in 47. We have, if you look at the scale of training, of students exchanges, of green projects that we are doing there, it's really like 4x, 5x of what we were doing before. It's actually the Africa relationship, again, is a story which is not often written upon. I've tried to publicize it a bit myself, but I'm very glad that you are focusing on it, and I would encourage you. Finally, well, not finally, two questions. Citizenship, people, foreigners coming to India wishing to take citizenship are eligible subject to what is laid out in the Citizenship Act. So there are a multiple set of, I would say, criteria that they have to meet. I'm sure you can look at it. I don't, to the best of my recollection, it's not specific to scholars. I think it is there for everybody. And finally, you know, if the world is to be less Eurocentric and more nation-centric, you know, I wasn't making the point that it is about nations and not about Europe. I think if you go to Europe, Europe in many ways has outgrown the nation. And you know, the nation coexists with a larger supranational organization. My point was, it's in a sense, it's kind of like the West versus the rest, you know. And it wasn't even honestly meant as a negative point. It was that, look, I understand your concerns, but I want you to understand that there are other parts of the world also have concerns which may be different. So I hear you. I want you to hear me. I'm not saying I'm not hearing you and will not hear you. So don't get me wrong there. I mean, it's not, it's neither a state versus a supra-state argument I was making or an anti-European argument I was making. I just felt that in the given situation, it's very important for the multipolarity point, that, you know, there are large parts of Asia and Africa and Latin America which are stakeholders in the world, and which today, if you look at a G20, their shares, their relative shares, if you think of it like a large enterprise, the world is a large enterprise, their shares are growing, and Europe should understand that.
Thank you. Minister, I don't want to really torture you with too many questions. We'll take the last 5 and I think we'll move on to, we'll finish here. Rashmi Sharma, PhD scholar from Jain University.
Good evening, sir. My name is Roshni. It's okay, sir. Recently, I was listening to you. I mean, to your conferences where you have been talking about how India is not aligning with any of the blocs, be it EU or the US bloc or the China bloc. I understand that that India should be having we should take our own. We are entitled to take our own stand, but wouldn't that consider to be an isolation with respect to if we are not taking side with any of the blocs? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Anshuman Behra of NIAS.
Your talk actually offered a very comprehensive discourse on national security that doesn't necessarily put the human-centric and the state-centric security as binaries. My question is on countering the radical ideology. What specific role does the External Affairs Ministry actually play in containing the radical and extremist ideologies, since they have serious local implications? Thank you.
There is Professor Dr. Paramesh. I think that's a question from the audience.
Good evening, sir. My question is specific. Russia and Ukraine war contribute significantly air pollution, global warming, climate change. And don't you think UN should be held these countries responsible to contribute to overcome this carbon footprint? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's one from my alma mater, Indian Institute of Science, so I can't ignore it. It says DCCC. Which one is that?
Anybody from IIC is entitled to ask a question and claim that they are DCCC. I think maybe it came.
Okay. Okay. So we shall go on. We have 2 more questions. One is from Shrestha Mandal from NIAS.
Good evening, sir. My question is, in terms of cultural exchanges and communications, particularly looking at how India is having 75th year going on, so what are the next steps and visions you plan for organizations and places such as ICCR in terms of contributing to national security at this stage?
Thank you. Last question, Tanya Sengupta from Jain University.
Hello, sir. So India has the largest diaspora,
and probably India is the one of the highest remittance receiving country. I would like to know, sir, whether we hold the same kind of relationship with the immigrants, those who are engaged in 3D jobs, dirty, demeaning, and dangerous, versus the white-collar workers. Thank you.
You know, the first question about if you don't join blocks, you will feel isolated. I mean, come on, this is India we are talking about. You know, I don't need to join somebody it's a kind of worry a small country can have. It's a kind of worry that someone who's really under very severe pressure, situationally may have. But this has not, I would say very honestly, it is not part of our DNA. Our DNA today, after all, look, a country which has fought so long and so patiently for its independence, which has then taken not the easy route. A lot of people took shortcuts saying, okay, we will do authoritarian regime, we'll do military dictatorships. We took the patient but sensible and ultimately, to my mind, the rewarding route forward, which was the democratic route forward. And we, even when we were weaker, we have sort of stood our ground. I mean, today, when you look at our ability to articulate positions, to in fact influence others, and a lot of countries actually honestly turn to us and think that we will voice what is in their hearts. So this is quite honestly not a worry I have at all, and certainly not under the Modi government. So let me be very, very clear on that point. The second issue, in a way, there were two questions which were linked. What is MEA doing about radicalization? Again, it's not a foreign policy issue per se. There's a internal security side to it. There's also a cultural side to it. I mean, radicalization again is a very ephemeral challenge for which the answers lie across the board. And in fact, the question which was asked by a subsequent person about how does the ICCR fit into the scheme of things? In an interesting way, what the ICCR projects culturally partly deals with that issue of radicalization as well, because when you project the inherent pluralism of India, which is very, very deep rooted. I mean, our pluralism is not something which is written in any book. It is something which is over 5,000 years. So it is something which is really very deep. Again, like I said, it is very deep. It's in our DNA too. So for all the challenges that we have, and we have one of the reasons why, again, we have been able to withstand the pressures of radicalization is that because the belief is so deeply entrenched in our society. But it is a concern, I don't think it's an area we should be complacent, and I flagged it because to me it was a very interesting example of outgrowing the old thinking, which was, look at somebody's passport and say, Acha, did you travel to that bad place? You don't have to travel to that bad place anymore to get bad ideas in your head. And the climate change issue and the conflict in Ukraine. Look, at the moment, there are a lot of consequences, and in my view, some of them are still unfolding, and maybe we don't even know some of them. At the moment, we believe, and I think a large part of the world believes, that the challenge today is to, if you were to pick a single thing saying this should be the starting point, I think the view is that cessation of fighting should be the starting point. And that the UN should, and UN is trying, the UN Secretary General, after all, did go to Russia and to Ukraine. But it's not just the UN. I think this is a big issue. It concerns the international community. Prime Minister himself has spoken to President Putin and President Zelensky on this matter. And we have from the start advocated that cessation of fighting is the right, and a return to diplomacy is the right place to start. For me to say, well, there are climate change consequences, I don't think will necessarily be the most effective argument right now to bring about any change. And finally, the issue of diaspora. I want to share with you a little bit about how different today our engagement is with diaspora. Go back and see, or see the next time. If you see, I have been with Prime Minister Modi to the Gulf. Okay. He has made it a point to go to labor camps, sit with the workers, eat with the workers. Okay. So it is not that you are talking diaspora, in a hotel ballroom with people in neckties and suits. We understand their value. We understand their contribution. A lot of what we did in Vande Bharat was actually with them as the centerpiece. That there were people who were left very vulnerable. Look, at that period, somewhere, in fact, I think in Parliament I have actually spoken about it. The number of times Prime Minister himself has called up rulers in the Gulf, urging them to give consideration to our workers out there. Or I have been in touch with my counterparts. We actually have, there was a fund called Indian Community Welfare Fund. We have vastly expanded it and expanded its usage actually for the vulnerable people. So, and we have also tried at this end to make sure that they are not preyed upon. So we today, make sure that the process of immigration is much more legal, is much more safeguarded. In fact, a lot of our effort today is, last time I was in Kuwait, the main agreement that I signed, and I'll tell you it gave me an enormous satisfaction, was actually for Indian domestic workers in Kuwait, so that their minimum wages, their rights, their passport, their ability to go to court was all ensured. So it is something which, ranks very high, because at the end of the day, I think our foreign policy is very much an integral part of our domestic vision. The domestic vision gives a lot of importance to that. So again, I will end with that note. 8 years of national security, connect the dots. Please have a more comprehensive view of what is national security, and think of the different ways by which your choices and your, in a sense, endeavors really contribute to it, because finally drops of water make an ocean. Thank you.
Before we move to the closing ceremony, I'd like to request Professor Sailesh Nayak to kindly present a memento to our esteemed guest.
This is Kerala, from Kallasakra, 6th century. So I can say, and this is the time when what we call as a Pythagoras. Actually, India used this, and we have a complete research article on this.
Yeah, I was reading in one of your...
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I now request Professor Nayak to kindly present the vote of thanks.
First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, for sparing so much time and interacting with us, and plus giving insight into the national security. I think it was really, we were all very fortunate to have him. I would also like to thank Ambassador Raghavan, who is also the member of our academic council and adjunct professor and very regular visitor to NIAS for everything, and for his advice all the time. So thank you, Ambassador Raghavan, to be here with us today and moderate this session. I would like also to thank all of you, especially all network institutions who came, not only them, but with the students. And I think the most important part is the way the young people have been thinking, the questions which they have been asking, I think, I'm sure that the India's future is very well secured. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody.